Hello, friends and attendees. This is Joe Quinn, broadcasting from Boston College Economics Department, and welcome to our session on labor markets and working conditions. And remember, as you've been asked before, to ask questions along the way using the cleverly named Ask a Question button. I will start with a little background relevant to two of our three papers. The study of labor supply decisions of older workers has become a growth industry. It's happened in the context of a remarkable socioeconomic shift for older workers, both men and women. Thanks to Dora Costa, we have labor force participation rate data on older men, 55 to 64 and 65 and older, going back to the Civil War. When Dora says post-war, she means Civil War. She has documented a century-long decline in the labor force participation rates of older American men, slowly at first, and then picking up speed during the 1960s and 1970s. 100 years of decline from the 1880s to the 1980s. Then the retirement environment started changing. First, the earliest legal age of mandatory retirement, which used to cover about half of the American labor force, was delayed from 65 to 70, and then it was eliminated altogether for the vast majority of American workers. Mandatory retirement is gone. If you wanted to keep working past age 70, as Barack Obama used to say, yes, you can. Then strong Social Security work disincentives, or retirement incentives, that penalized those who continued to work after age 65 were eliminated, as Social Security's delayed retirement credit became actuarially fair. Then defined benefit pension plans, which also penalized those who stay on the job too long, fell into disfavor and were mostly replaced by defined contribution plans, which have no age-specific work or retirement incentives. The Social Security work disincentive disappeared, and the employer pension one became much less important because the nature of pensions changed. In addition, older workers were healthier and living longer, and jobs were becoming less physically demanding, as Italo will discuss in just a minute. And technology helped those who wanted to continue working. Better hearing aids, better computers, allowing folks to work from home. Again, if you want to keep working, yes, you can. In fact, all of these changes altered the trade-off between work and leisure in favor of work. And since incentives do matter, older workers responded just as one would expect. And the labor force participation rates of older workers began to increase, modestly for men, but remember, after 100 years of decline, and much more dramatically for women. Some of this additional time in the labor force was spent on the career job. People retired later from their career jobs. And much of it, half or more we estimate, was on bridge jobs, which is Jeffrey Wanger's topic. Bridge jobs with new employers, often part-time, often in a new line of work, sometimes in a new part of the country. Better weather, better golf courses, closer to the grandkids, or maybe further away from the grandkids. Others left the labor force for a while and then reconsidered and returned to the labor force, the concept of unretirement. And the whole conceptualization of retirement in America changed. The stereotypical single event directly from full-time work to complete retirement, that's the day I retired, became a process for many, beginning with full-time career work and ending with complete retirement or labor force withdrawal, just like before, but with some very interesting way stations along the way. A new world of gradual or partial retirement. Folks might disagree about which step along the way constituted retirement. When did you retire? Was it when you left your career job? Was it when you claimed employer pensions or Social Security benefits? Was it when your earnings dropped to some fraction of what they used to be on your full-time jobs? Different folks had different definitions of what constitutes retirement in this more complicated world. I think that this new world of gradual labor market exit is a good thing. Good for whom? Well, good for the country, since more workers means more output to be distributed to workers and retirees. Good for the firms who employ these experienced workers late in their work careers, and good for most of the workers themselves, who ease out of the labor force gradually with a couple more years of earnings and pension and Social Security accumulation, and a more and more financial security. So on that cheery note, let's turn to our 3 papers in this session. 2 papers are works in progress, and the authors will share their plans for research. 2 of the papers are looking at the less studied side of this market, namely employers rather than employees. We'll hear from our 3 presenters who have promised to limit their remarks to about 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for discussion of all 3 of our papers. So let's first hear from Italo from the RAND Corporation.
Thank you, John. Hello, everybody. My name is Italo Lopez Garcia. I'm an economist at RAND Corporation. Today I'm presenting this work in progress, The Changing Nature of Work, which is jointly with Nicole Mestas from Harvard and Kathleen Mullen at RAND. Next slide. So in this paper, what we try to do is to answer 2 questions. One of them is like whether job demands have changed in the United States recently, particularly over the last 15 years. And if so, how these changes have translated into improvements or changes in overall in work capacity. So this is motivated by by the observation that Social Security disability insurance, both the applications and awards have recently declined, but that has not been accompanied by improvements in health. So since disability is interaction between health and job demands, then an alternative hypothesis is that physical job demands have been decreasing, sorry, that's a typo, and cognitive job demands have been increasing. So there's some evidence about this from the US and Europe, 2 studies that they analyze changes in the composition of work. In particular, they they find that there has been a steady decrease in the number of workers in physically demanding jobs, and an increase in the number of workers in cognitively demanding jobs. However, these studies, they're kind of old. I mean, they analyze changes from 1970, 2006. There's no more recent information, but also there are 2 things that we can find in literature. One of them is if job demands have changed, how do we decompose these changes? Are within occupation changes, or are changes in the composition of work, of jobs? And then the second is how these changes translate into work capacity. Next slide. So our contribution is that we address these 2 questions by linking measures of job demands from 2003 and 2018 from the ONET database, particularly from the abilities module. And we link this data with data we collected on the RAND American Life Panel survey in 2018 about people's own abilities. So what we do then is like we build on recent work, a recent paper with Nicole and Kathleen as well, where we build a new measure of work capacity that is based on the comparison between self-reported ability levels and the abilities required to perform all the jobs in the economy from ONET. So with this database, what we do is that we examine 3 questions. So we first analyze how job demands have changed over time. We decompose those changes into within occupation changes and into between occupation changes. And we look at how changes in job demands have translated into changes in latent work capacity. Next slide. So we deploy 2 data sources. One is the ONET, in particular the abilities module, which measures basically the 52 minimum required levels of abilities to perform all occupations in the economy, nearly 800. They can be classified into cognitive, psychomotor, physical, and sensory. Each ability level is rated by job analysts on a scale from 1 to 7, with 3 anchors, which are examples of each of these abilities. And it's also rated the importance of that ability for that occupation on a scale from 1 to 5. in our survey, what we do, which is the American Work Capacities and Ability Survey 2018, we ask respondents to rate their own ability levels, the same 52 abilities from ONET, on a scale from 1 to 7, using the same anchors that ONET uses, but we ask them regardless of their job. Next slide. Oh, that's not the next slide. Sorry, next slide. I think I missed one slide in between. Can one back? Back. Can you go one slide back, please? Okay, there is a problem with this slide. Okay, can you move forward, please? One slide. More. Next one. Next one. Okay, so these are the 52 abilities classified into the 4 different groups. I'm not going to spend time here because I'm in the interest of time. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to discuss some of these results and descriptives. So the first question that we address is we just comparing job demands over time. Next slide. So I want to start with an example. So this is an example that I actually found quite interesting. This is the construction laborers. This is one of the occupations with the highest shares in the economy, which is also a fast-growing occupation. So the employment share of construction laborers has increased from 0.89% in 2003 to 1.44% in 2018. And what we see, this is a tip. We expect it to be a very physically demanding occupation, and indeed that's the case. However, the increase in physically demanding, the increase in physical job demands has been only of 8.4%, it's a very slight increase, whereas the increase in the cognitive tasks that this job implies has been 120%. So, and that's kind of motivated what we're going to see in the next slide. When we look at the overall increase of job demands and also by ability dimension, so we see that including all the occupations in the economy, there has been a slight increase in the average job demand. But when we look at these changes by ability dimension, we see that there has been significant increases in cognitive job demands and in sensory job demands, and significant decreases in psychomotor and physical demands. Next slide. It's also interesting to see what happens when we open these abilities by education groups. And in case of the cognitive abilities, which is also the case of sensory abilities, but I don't show it here, the increase in cognitive job demands is mostly explained by increases in low-skill jobs, or those jobs that are mostly composed by high school degrees or people with some college education, whereas the decrease in physical job demands has mostly happened in high-skill jobs, jobs that are typically high bachelor's degrees and people with a postgraduate education. Next slide. So now we'll discuss the composition of these changes. Next slide. So now here what I do is like in the blue bar, this is just the average job demands in 2003 using the job shares in 2003. The yellow bar is the 2018 average job demands, but fixing the job shares to the shares that we observed in 2003. So basically, from the blue bar to the yellow bar, what we're seeing is that what can explain the increase in job demands once we fix the job share. So this is the within change. So changes that are explained by the nature of the jobs and not by the composition of the jobs. And when you go from the yellow bar to the red bar, with the red bar is basically the average job demands in 2018. Using the 2018 job shares, there's no change. So this is what this is saying, that most of the changes in job demands that we have based at least in abilities required to perform jobs are mostly explained by within occupation changes and not by composition of the jobs. Next slide. This is just a corroboration what I said before. We just estimate this and we just compute this within occupation and between occupation changes. Most of the changes for all the abilities are within occupation. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so now I discuss what we find in terms of how these changes in job demand have translated into changes in work capacity. Sorry, I didn't have the time because the slide on the how we constructed measures was kind of lost. But basically, this curve, what it shows is that the cumulative distribution of a measure of occupation-specific work capacity. So how able I am to do how able I am to do my own job based on the comparison of the ability levels that I report to have and the required levels to do that job. So what we see here is that the measure of occupation-specific work capacity to do my own job with job demands in 2018 is slightly shifted to the right, and with the job demands from 2003 is to the left. So what this implies is that the changes in the mix of job demands that we find have translated into a slight increase in the capacity, in the latent work capacity of individuals. Next slide. And when we look at our measure of total work capacity, which again, it's like I didn't have time the time to explain it, but it's basically a measure of what's the fraction of the jobs that, given my abilities, I can do in the economy. What we see is also that the measure of work capacity with job demands 2018 is shifted to the right in comparison with the measure of work capacity using job demands 2003. So overall, what we see here is that when we fix abilities and we just change job demands, the work capacity of individuals has increased. Next slide. So here I conclude. So we find a slight increase average job demands over the last 15 years. This is mostly explained by an increase in cognitive and sensory job demands, particularly among low-skilled jobs, and a decrease in physical and psychomotor job demands, particularly among high-skilled jobs, which can be interpreted as penalization to low-skilled individuals. Changes in job demands are largely explained by within occupation changes, and these changes have translated, at least according to our preliminary results and our measure of work capacity, into improvements in the ability to work of our respondents. So that's for me, and I introduce our next speaker, Stephanie Renan.
Thanks, Steph. This is Jeff. I'm going to be explaining or discussing some work that we have not yet done. We've designed a survey and have yet to put it in the field. So what I'll show you today is at least the design. And unfortunately, at this point, we don't have any empirical results for you. This work is joint with David Powell, who's also at RAND, and Jed Kolko, who is the chief economist at Indeed.com. Next slide, please. So as Joe alluded to earlier in the kickoff to this, you know, we're concerned about extending working lives. There's been a big change in demographics of the labor force. They're much older. We think this is a good thing for many of the reasons that he already discussed. Improves financial well-being. It can potentially increase or improve cognitive health if you remain in the labor force. Mixed evidence about that, and potentially physical health depending on the type of job you have while you're working. We also have pretty good evidence that workers want flexibility in order to stay in the labor force. They want to continue to have some control over their work hours and work weeks per year. This is an important job attribute that seems to be associated with continuing to work. And that meaningful work is an important motivator for folks. And so we have this evidence from the supply side. We don't have evidence from the firm side, or at least not much. So the first question and the questions that we're going to focus our attention on are all from the labor demand side, from the employer side. How available are jobs with attractive attributes? Will firms offer these jobs, these types of working conditions? If they do offer them, do they offer them to all workers or only certain types of workers with certain levels of education, certain types of characteristics? We want to know in this particular focus, this is a rather large research project, and there's a sub-focus here, which is whether or not current workers who are planning near-term retirement are allowed or are capable of adjusting their working conditions. And then the question, of course, at the end of the day is what's the cost the firm of making these adjustments, similar to what Steph mentioned earlier in her piece. Next slide. So how are we going to go about answering these questions? Well, the idea here is to partner with Indeed.com. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Indeed, it's the world's largest online job site. They have 60 million unique visitors a month, and approximately 1.5 million companies are represented. Half of total job applicants get their jobs through Indeed.com or apply through Indeed.com. It's an amazing resource. There are job postings, employers, and job seekers. They represent a wide range of industries. We've had discussions with them going down. Do you have mining? Yes. Do you have industries that you wouldn't otherwise think would be advertising on Indeed.com are in fact there. So our goal is to develop a sampling frame that will be industry and nationally representative and potentially even regionally representative. We're going to target hiring managers and HR representatives using a series of screener questions that indicate whether or not the person has any responsibility over these kinds of jobs, whether they manage workers in terms of their hours or whether they hire workers in terms of HR. Next slide, please. Here is a screenshot of the screener question. The survey is complete. We're still waiting for to get some pilot testing done and some legal questions between RAND and Indeed.com that need to be answered, but we should be in the field very shortly. It's difficult to see, but you can see the screener questions. Please select the duties that you have responsibility for at your firm, and you can select as many as possible. If the person says, I'm not responsible for any of these, they exit the survey, and we don't count them as part of the sample frame. If you answer positively to any of the above, which is negotiating wages, accommodating changes in schedule, et cetera, then you're part of the survey. You have some responsibility for those types of things, and we'll ask you a series of questions. Next slide, please. So the survey has a front period where there's a set of questions for individuals that are respondent. We get the respondent's age, race, and sex. We get firm attributes, and then we get job attributes. We ask them about the job that they most recently hired for, and we also ask for the job that's most common at the firm. We get information about pay and telework and hours and pay time off and caregiver leave in the take-up part of the survey so that we can vary those things meaningfully in the experimental part that follows. Next slide, please. The experimental setup is simply to give people a job choice between job A and job B that varies a particular job attribute, randomly assigned, and wages, which are randomized according to some, based on the input that they give us. We just generate a random shock to that wage and apply that to the job offer that they get. Next slide, please. And here is an example of a particular question that we would ask a respondent. The front, while this looks like a lot of words on the page, the front matter or the top matter doesn't change from job choice to job choice. So, listed below are 2 work arrangements. I put in aeronautical engineer. I just selected that as part of the take-up survey, and that will be a way to anchor the respondent throughout the survey so that they know who we're talking about. For a current job at the firm, the worker would like to start shifting into retirement in the next year or 2. So here is our bridge employment treatment. We talk about the fact that the job stays the same regardless of A and B. And most importantly, that the worker's indifferent. That the worker's indifferent between the job choices means that the firm should select which one of them is best for the firm. What we're ultimately trying to identify here are firm costs, and we don't want to conflate that with whether or not the worker would take the job. And here you see a situation where the position requires 45 hours a week, worked over 5 days, and it pays $89,000, and the firm can offer that job to a worker. Or they could choose job B, where they had 45 hours over 4 days a week, but it pays significantly less. So the worker would be less available, but there'd be a lot less compensation. So which offer would you make? Next slide, please. Same exact front matter is, again, you can see, but now job arrangement A is the worker receives 20 days of PTO at $89,000 a year. And job arrangement B, the worker receives 10 days of PTO at $102,000 a year. Again, which offer would the firm like to make? So next slide, please. That data will allow us to non-parametrically estimate the full distribution, the cumulative distribution function of firms' willingness to provide the amenity. In cases where we have job A and that provides the amenity, we have a wage associated with that. And where job B doesn't provide the amenity, we have a wage associated with that. And then we can simply estimate the probability that the firm cost is above the wage difference that we randomly assigned. Next slide, please. In addition to, and again, I apologize, the font is much smaller than I anticipated. In addition to the experiment, we're going to ask people to what extent it's possible to negotiate over particular job attributes. Can the worker negotiate over pay? Is it possible to negotiate over hours per week, days per week, schedule flexibility, shift work, other things along those lines? If a worker answers yes, that it is possible, there's a follow-on question that asks who they negotiate with. Do they negotiate with the HR manager? Do they negotiate with their direct supervisor? How does that all work out? Next slide, and this will be the last slide for today. We ask a series of questions about how difficult it is to change your working conditions. Again, we give them a scenario. How difficult would it be for a full-time worker in this job with 2 years of work experience to permanently reduce her work hours to 20 hours per week? So if they were full-time, they'd like to go to half-time. How difficult is that? There's a 7-point scale here from impossible to, it's automatic on request. The firm has a policy to do this. And the second item would be to reduce your days in the office per week to 2 to 3. And lastly, to reduce your job responsibilities. So in the end, what we'll have is a cost associated with the firm. We'll have whether or not workers can negotiate over these things and the difficulty for changing them for incumbents in the job. What's left off of here is these treatments are randomized by sex and by age, so we'll be able to look at whether or not you offer these types of job amenities differentially for women and men and for older and younger workers. Next slide, please. I just come in on 15 seconds under. So back to Joe with questions. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.
Okay, am I back? Oh, wait a minute.
You're back, Joe. I can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you, all three. Excellent work, and we look forward to the continuation of it. So I have some questions here for each of you. And let me start with Italo. A question came in. Does what you found about the changing nature of work for low-skilled workers have any implications for policy changes that might come down the pike for Social Security in the 2030s? Like a further increase in the full retirement age, which is one way to cut benefits. Will it be easier or harder for these workers to continue working in the future, given what you found?
That's a very good question. Actually, what we found, just to repeat, is basically that cognitive job demands have increased for low-skilled workers, but that has not been compensated by a decrease or by a substantial decrease in physical job demands for them. So in a way, what we're finding is that there's some sort of penalization to low-skilled workers in the way that the nature of work has been changing, at least over the last 15 years. So in that sense, that's kind of bad news in terms of the working longer policies, right, for this group. So any policy that encourages working longer for low-skilled individuals should take into account that the fact that although in average physical job demands or the physical burden of jobs for this group, so for overall has been decreasing, that's not the case for low-skilled workers. So we really need to kind of think about targeted policies in this sense. I mean, there's a lot of evidence showing that the effects of retiring earlier or later are quite heterogeneous, right? And they might be retired later, might be quite good for white collar occupations, but not so good with blue collar occupations. And that's actually consistent with our findings.
Good. Thank you. Stephanie, are most of the cases you're looking at folks who worked for a firm and then became disabled, or are these issues having to do with folks hiring for the first time someone with disabilities?
Yeah, so in the setting we're looking at, these are all folks who were working and then they experienced an injury or illness, some type of impairment on the job. That's due to the nature of the program we're studying. It's a program in workers' compensation, so there has to be a connection to the labor market. But certainly we could think of more broad types of accommodations that would generalize to, employers hiring for the first time as well.
Yeah. And do you have a feel for, even though this isn't the group you're studying, why in the latter case folks would hire someone with disabilities? Are they doing it because they run afoul of the law if they don't? Or, as Spike Lee might say, they're doing the right thing? Or could it actually be more profitable to hire someone with disabilities given the fact that the wage is then subsidized?
That's a good question. In this, it would depend, I think, on the type of accommodation. I think firms have a lot of different factors, kind of related to what Jeff was talking about, that they consider when they're hiring a worker. Certainly they're looking for someone with the right skills to do the job that will allow them to produce whatever output or, whatever it is they need to do. We in our model hope to be able to extrapolate a little more to think about what role wage subsidies could play. In this case, the wage subsidy was targeted to, this very short transitional period to help someone kind of bridge back into full-time employment. It wasn't designed to be something that would be long-lasting. So it's possible, though, that it would provide incentive in the short run.
Yeah. And one last question. Although you didn't focus on it here, in your paper, you mentioned this natural experiment that you're going to use with subsidy change from 50 to 45.
Yeah.
And the question is, are you confident that that's enough of a change from 40 to 55, from 50 to 45 for you to pick up the kind of impacts that it might have?
It's a good question. I'll expand on it a little bit. So in 2013, they changed the value of the wage subsidy from 50 to 45%. So that's the variation we're hoping to use in our IV strategy. So we're a little skeptical of that as well. But we've spoken with a lot of people in Oregon involved in the policy decisions, and they're very interested in this work because they've heard so much from employers about how they were unhappy that the subsidy was reduced from 50 to 45%. So that gives us at least some anecdotal evidence that people are noticing it and responding to it. But of course, we'll have to wait and see what the data tells us.
Time will tell.
Yes, exactly.
So a couple questions for Jeff. In these alternative arrangements that you have people choosing between, how do you decide on what the parameters are? For example, in the paper, you mentioned two alternatives, one which had half the hours, but 60% of the pay. Or do you give different alternatives to different people, which allows you to generate this distribution?
Yeah, so we offer, so each respondent will answer 10 of those questions.
Okay.
We randomly assign, so we'll anchor the wage at what they pay currently, and then we'll just hit that with a random shock, and then we'll randomly assign different types of job attributes among a menu of possibilities. They're not all continuous, most of them are dichotomous. You get 10 hours, 10 paid time off for 20, and then you get a wage shock. Each person gets a same representative individual, so it's a male or female of a particular experience level, and then we get 10 of those for each individual.
I see. And another question for you, Jeff, from Jeff Sansenbacher. Have you had conversations with Indeed or employers since the pandemic that has informed your survey design or expectations or results? Since you're going out into this horrible new world, how does that affect what you're going to do?
That's a super good question, and obviously David and I were sort of kicking ourselves that we couldn't get this into the field in December and then revisit it again in under the current circumstances, because that would have been, just gold.
Would have been the greatest natural experiment of all time.
Gradual experiment in the history of labor economics. So, but we didn't get it done in time. And so what we're very concerned about for obvious reasons is that, the prices of telework have just plummeted. Everyone realized, everyone had a huge barrier and a cost of entry, and all of a sudden everyone was forced to pay that. And suddenly they realized it's not nearly as costly. We'll see. We have had many discussions with Indeed. As you can well imagine, they have been absolutely overwhelmed with their, changing their business model and changing their work to accommodate changes in the labor market. And that's part of the reason why we've been delayed in getting this survey into the field. But we've added new questions about how different answers would be pre and post, try and get an assessment of that as well.
And I think we have time for one last question for Stephanie, also from Jeff Sonsenbacher. And he asked, Stephanie, do you have a sense whether employers who want to hold on to particular employees, perhaps because of firm-specific training that's important, whether they're more likely to participate in the EAIP? Is there some sort of selection going on here?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question, Jeff. I mentioned briefly that we see that workers who have been accommodated through EAIP have higher pre-injury wages. We haven't dug into that a lot yet, but we have some ideas around that it could be reflective of the types of jobs they were doing, and maybe they're, it's hard to find someone with that skill set, or they're just very well experienced in, in the firm specific training. So it's certainly something we need to look into. Stay tuned.
So we have a minute or two. Do any of you three have questions for the other of you three? All right, it sounds like we give 2 minutes back to the pool. Anyway, I enjoyed all three of your presentations. You all stayed within time as you promised. Good questions came in from abroad and good answers from you folks. And we look forward to later versions of your work. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thanks for hosting, Joe. Appreciate it.
Thank you for
A pleasure.
Joe. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.